Hola Mónica, ¿cómo estás?
Hola, muy bien, qué gusto estar aquí con vos.
Sí, mucho gusto en conocerte. Estoy muy agradecida que estás aquí y hablar más sobre tú y tu negocio, Viva Kids Learning. So tell me a little bit more about yourself and what is it that you currently do?
Okay, so I was born and raised in Honduras. My parents were immigrants in Honduras. My dad is from Spain and my mom is from Panama. And so they just, long story short, they moved to Honduras and they had all of us there. So once I decided to go to college in the US, I don't have a super exciting story. I just got on a plane, got a student visa, and came to study in Louisiana. And so, yeah, so fast forward, I'm now a mom here and I'm raising two children, bilingual and bicultural. And I have my business. It just had its 5 year anniversary. It's a business dedicated to honoring, celebrating, preserving, teaching, sharing our language and our culture with our children and with anybody who wants to participate in the celebration.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what we
great.
do. Mm-hmm.
That is great. And we'll definitely touch a little bit more about your business and what you're doing to the community as well. But first, I would like to get to know you a little bit more, tu historia, y also for our listeners who would like to know a little bit more about you, Monica. So, can you walk us through your cultural identity? And the reason why I'm asking this is because you're so outspoken in social media about this and specifically about your experience and how that was like when you first came to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it was an interesting experience because I've always been considered myself being a daughter of two immigrants. I always would
Mm-hmm.
consider myself multinational. So I always identified as catracha, which is Hondureña. And but I also always identified with that side of both sides of my parents. That was always instilled. When I came here, I thought I knew who I was, pretty connected to my roots, but I also had to learn another layer of who I was and where I was. And
Mm-hmm.
so insert there like new forms that I had never, it was truly the first time being by myself, filling out, to give an example, official paperwork and things like that, and having to figure out where do I fit in the box? Like I'm Honduran, what else am I? Soy hondureña,
Right.
right? And so
Yeah.
then having to explore now that I was seen and that I had to identify on a certain box in a certain group. And so that still is a learning process for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot when you talk about cultural identity. Culture is something that's very fluid. And so it can change depending on who you are, where you're at, what's going on around you. Now, I always felt a very strong connection. And so even in the moments where there were episodes of a lot of acculturation or a lot of assimilation, which means like I was like really getting absorbed by the culture around me. I always got pulled back to my roots. So I definitely identify with being a catracha, with being a Latina, being Hispana. And so, and yet these two new terms that are part of my identity are still things that I continue to explore and understand what they mean.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing because oftentimes in the United States, they put us in this bucket, ¿verdad? Latinos. And it's like, well, you don't know our story. You don't know our dialect. You don't know our culture, our preference in music and foods, right? Like it's not a homogenous group.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, with your experience, right? And now raising children in the United States, like how does that look like in terms of you raising children in a different culture but still having the sense of identity, verdad, de tu cultura and your partners as well? Can you kind of unpack that just a little bit as far as with what you do and what you strive for in terms of raising children to have this meaningful identity in their culture?
Right. Yes. So yes, the terms Latino and Hispanic, I have sort of a love-hate relationship because what I
Hmm.
love about them is that they give us a sense of community and belonging to a group of people that we perhaps speak the same language and have shared experiences. But What I don't like, or sometimes feel like it takes away and erases all that identity, all that uniqueness of each one of our nationalities or our groups, our communities.
Right.
So with my children, I openly speak about all of the above. I talk to them about what this term means, what it looks like, about the fact that I'm from Honduras and that's what I identify. And this is what Hondureños, we eat, we drink, we dance. And so it's always been pretty intentional and very specific about what it is that we're doing and learning about when I talk to them about Honduras or about Spain or about their heritage, because those are also part of their heritage. So we also celebrate the other part of them too, that they're born and raised here. And so we also honor those pieces. And I've had to sort of come to terms and be at peace with the fact that they're not going to be a carbon copy of my cultural identity.
Yes. Yeah.
Like they love when they see the Honduran flag somewhere, it just melts my heart that they get so excited. But how I feel is gonna be different what they feel when they see those colors or when they hear the anthem. I mean, they identify it, but they're gonna have their own identity. And so I present to them everything that's important, that that is those values and those treasures from where I'm from. And I present them and I give those to them. And then they're going to decide what they hold on to and make part of who they are.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love this. I love that you have been outspoken about being intentional, right? About raising bilingual and bicultural kids. One question I have for you, followed on what you said, is what are some tips that you can share to Latina moms, specifically because this platform is for Latina moms? So what tips can you share to them about preserving their culture while raising children?
Yes, I think that we tend to like get super overwhelmed and say, how are we going to do it? But I think the main things is to be intentional daily, to be practical, integrate little pieces into your daily routine. It can be a playlist here. It can be a dish a week. It can be just a show or a book, and finding those little resources that are going to help you provide those little pieces of input. Just like the language is very parallel to when we are raising bilingual, same applies to bicultural, is being persistent, being consistent, being practical, and integrating it into the everyday. And most importantly is creating that connection, that emotional connection, making it fun. That's always first, and then it just kind of snowballs from there.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm honestly thinking about this right now. Dia de Muertos is coming soon, and I feel like Dia de los Muertos has been more predominant now since the movie Coco.
Oh
And I feel like
yes, it's
often a
really
lot
good.
of, yes, like so many families are now implementing that in their households. But for me growing up, like I grew up here in the US and my parents are from Mexico, and they didn't show that to us. Like we didn't do any of those traditional things for Dia de Muertos. It was always Halloween, just Halloween.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, yeah, I want to be intentional to show this bicultural side of things to my son about, okay, this is what Halloween is, but after October 31st, we're going to switch over and do the traditional things that you do in Mexico, especially because his grandma on my husband's side, she's from Oaxaca, and unfortunately she didn't bring that into the household. And I think it was the 90s, right, where I don't know, like we grew up in the 90s and Spanish was considered like a deficit. You didn't immerse yourself into the culture or language in the schools, and unfortunately there's still some school systems that are that way, but it is so important to at least bring that into the household, right?
Right.
And yeah, just the intentionality piece. I love it. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I
So,
see a lot of that resurrection and reconnection of new generations, especially for young mamas and papas who are born here and their parents came here. It's like a lot. And like I told you, I've also gone through episodes of where you acculturate and then you assimilate, and then there's some things that kind of get pushed back. And you can always go back and bring it back front and center and reconnect with it. And offer that to your children in the next generation. So I love that
Yeah.
there's that resurrection of the culture and bringing back traditions kind of lost in past
Yes.
generations.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Resurrection of the
Yeah.
culture. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So,
truly is that. I
yeah.
see people who skip languages. I see it a lot here in Texas.
Mhm.
And as an Hondureña, all of this is like so new to me. And I really approach it with like a lot of curiosity. It's like, how did we get to this point here? And you see the systems and you see the policies that
Mhm.
contributed to that erasure and elimination and almost extinction of cultural and tradition. And I love that this new generations we're pushing hard to bring it back and
Mhm.
reconnect and have our children have that opportunity that if they wish to hold on to them, they can.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it makes you wonder about like just like previous generations in terms of like how culture may have been lost or language may have been lost and
Oh yeah.
traditions as well.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. And I'm sure that you see that more in Texas. I live in the Chicago area, so I'm only speaking like two, three generations back, but four or five generations, I mean, I'm sure that that really made an impact in terms of how people are raised and how they even identify themselves.
Right.
When we know that in the US, it's a black and white kind of society. Like we're
Mhm.
clumped into a specific category based on our appearance without really
Mhm.
knowing where our roots come from or where we really come from or our ancestors come from. So yeah,
Right.
it's very interesting. And so I'm glad that yeah, like there is this shift and redefining kind of like okay, this is perhaps where my family comes from or my ancestors come from and now I'm going to sort of redefine my identity based on what I actually want to identify myself in this
Mhm.
country. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.